Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the WhatsOnStage Podcast, which, Sarah, I think is an international episode. You are coming to me from somewhere very sunny and very nice.
I'm coming to you from sunny Venice, which interestingly is about the same temperature as sunny London. It's the first time I've ever been to Italy and got off the plane and thought, oh, well, that's a bit cooler than it was where I left. I think by the time this goes out, the English weather will have reverted to type and there'll be much more rain.
Fingers crossed.
But I, at the moment, and for the next couple of weeks, am enjoying the sun, which is lovely, at the Venice Dance Biennale, which is fabulous.
I feel like it's an episode of The Rest is Politics, where we're all sat in various different locations across the globe talking about something.
By the wonders of technology.
Yeah, the rest is theatre. Yeah, we'll pitch it to Gary Lineker.
Exactly. But for now, we should say hello from me, Sarah Crompton, the critic.
And me, Alex Wood, the editor.
In our different places and our different homes. And on this week's podcast, the other strange thing about preparing for this is that we decided to talk about the Edinburgh Festival, which is with us, well, this month, in fact. And it really kicks off quite early this year because I'll miss the start at the end of July. So thinking about Edinburgh, where my wardrobe will be entirely different and will contain mainly Macintoshes, seems very strange from sun-baked Venice.
It's funny because this is the second Edinburgh Fringe that we've talked about on the WhatsOnStage podcast. So I'm almost getting nostalgic thinking about us as a new WhatsOnStage podcast last year, finding our feet and tackling the Edinburgh Fringe. And now we're back, wiser, older, more aware of what cuts through and what doesn't.
Chart-topping success. We're doing, yeah? More and more listeners. So thank you all for listening to us. It's really lovely that we're attracting so many followers.
Yes, and hopefully we can therefore platform some exciting shows that are going to the Edinburgh Fringe. How did you find it, Sarah, looking through the list this time to see what you were excited about?
Well, we agreed in advance that we would think about things that had got an afterlife as well. It's so hard to judge Edinburgh, whether it's one's own age and one's own sense of anticipation, or whether the Edinburgh Festival itself is actually changing. I do have a sense that the Edinburgh Festival itself is actually changing. It remains a place where comedy is important and more dominant, I would say. I would say that there is less original theatre than perhaps sometimes in the past. There's less experiment. There's certainly, I think, fewer student productions and things like that. I don't know if that's actually true or if that's just my sense, but I think it's so expensive now for people to take a student production to the Fringe that you have to be deeply serious about it. It has to be something that you're desperate to get on rather than just going to have a good time. But having said all that, it always surprises me how much there is that is rich and interesting and that I do want to see. I always start off in exactly the same way with making my list, that I always think, oh, there's nothing. And then obviously as you go on and on and on, you think, oh my God, how am I going to fit all this in? And I am going up 3 times this year, so I'm doing short runs. I'm going up partly to appear on a panel about criticism. Very exciting, with Arifa Akbar from The Guardian, and we're doing a panel on criticism at the Edinburgh Books Festival, which is very nice. Monday morning, 10 a.m. on the 18th of August, should you be passing by. So that means that I was going back in a different week, and there's some quite important dancing that week. So, but even with that, even with 3 visits, I'm still finding it quite hard to schedule everything I want to go and see, which is a good sign, I think.
You're totally right about that journey that you go on as a critic / commentator, that every year you go in having relatively low expectations and then one show or another will blow those expectations out of the water, which I think is good. It's better to be surprised than to be let down. I would rather that I was going in not excited by as much than too excited about things that then don't actually excite me when I'm in the room. And Edinburgh is about making hits, not about cementing hits. So maybe that's the right attitude for us to have. But I totally agree on the point that, you know, I've been going to the Edinburgh Fringe now every year for I think about 12 years, although I won't be going this year, controversially.
I
'cause
know.
I've got some family commitments overseas.
It's a big moment not to be going at all.
I know. I was saying to you, I probably, right now I feel as though that's going to be great for my sanity, but I know I'm going to get FOMO about a week in when everyone starts raving about something incredible that might not be transferring or something. But I remember when I first went, was like a 19-year-old or something by myself. I think I'd gone before, but not sort of like on my own steam. And just the sheer overwhelming sense of stepping into a city that felt like a carnival. Everywhere you turned, there was somewhere to drink, there was somewhere to eat, there was somewhere to party till 5 a.m. Part of me feels as though that has diminished in the intervening 12 years since I first started, that it doesn't have that same chaotic, anything can happen kind of sensation to it. And I think that's, like you say, partly down to cost, because you can't get the same number of young people that used to flock up to Edinburgh and just go for really boozy nights out and sort of like meet each other at bars at 3 a.m. and then form lifelong friendships that turn into theatre companies. So it does, as a result, become something different. And, but at the same time, as I've grown and become an editor or a critic or a commentator, the way that I treat the Edinburgh Fringe is very different. Like, and now I will completely avoid the Royal Mile. I will, go nowhere near those bars after midnight because I want to go to sleep or I've got too much to write up. So I've evolved, the Edinburgh Fringe has evolved, but the marriage, as dysfunctional as it is, still continues. But how much longer? There's every year there's always the question of like, is this sustainable? Is it not sustainable? And yet it still sustains on in some form or another. And I think we've seen, for example, with Summerhall, if you haven't been following the story over the last year, there's been huge turbulence around that venue. To the point that they've now got a completely new operator. And I think that's sort of shaken the model a bit, but it still stands. It's still back programming shows this year. So it can't have been too devastating a transformation there. So maybe Edinburgh Fringe will always continue. It's like, it's impervious to eventual collapse.
I think there's some truth in that. And I also think it's the case that you have your own Edinburgh. I've always thought you fashion your own festival. So in terms of recommendations to people thinking of going for the first time, you make it what you want it to be. And I feel that I've lived through many different Edinburghs. I mean, you definitely that Edinburgh of sort of wild booziness. In fact, my very first Edinburgh was utterly awful, because I went to see a friend who was performing, and then he was having some kind of crisis of confidence, and I barely saw him, and didn't have any money, didn't really know what I was doing. Was staying in a hostel which was pretty grim. So my Edinburgh experience has only improved from that point, though I've always managed to see things that were magnificent. But you do go through different Edinburghs. You make your own festival. So that when I had kids, there was a point where my festival was definitely, in the day, it was kids-based, and that was lovely. And it took me to all kinds of work that I wouldn't otherwise have seen. And that's definitely a bit that's expanded, that most venues now have children's shows, and they're conscious that young parents might come with families, and that was a joy. And then I've had my professional Edinburgh, where I've tried to catch all the best drama, and I think you in the end know where your happy places are. I'm always very happy in the Traverse, which I think has become less central to the festival than when I first went, when it was undoubtedly the hub. As other hubs have opened up, like the Assembly, the Pleasance, Summerhall, I think Traverse is slightly less, essential, I guess. But it's essential to me. I would always go there. I would always make sure I saw 3 shows. There are always shows that come out of that theatre that have a life, have an impact. And I love going there. I love the National Theatre of Scotland's productions, which we'll come on to talk about. I love aspects of the Pleasance. I like being in that courtyard particularly. So you find your own place and build your own festival around it to some extent. And I also think that the thing to try to do is to be open, because some of the nicest things I've ever seen have just been from somebody recommending it in a queue. And they've just said, have you seen this? And I've gone to see it and it's been brilliant. And I think the danger is overbooking in advance, but of course the other danger is underbooking in advance, because the really successful shows get sold out. So there are things you definitely want to see. You should always book in advance and then build around that. But that capacity just to say, oh, I'll give that a go, I think is lovely.
I think we had that last year with one of our big breakout hits, which was Brian Watkins's Weather Girl, now set for Netflix success and heading to North America for a run as well. Wasn't on our radar, particularly when the Fringe started, and yet within 2 weeks was a complete sellout. So yeah, hits can still be made. So moving on then to the shows that we think might cause some excitement this year, where would you start in terms of what you want to recommend to audiences for 2025?
Well, I'm going to start the most obvious place and probably not spend too long on it. But the most obvious, largest theatre show is James Graham's new play, Make It Happen, which is a National Theatre of Scotland production, and which stars Brian Cox. So it's big, there's no getting around that. What's exciting about it is that it is about Scotland, and it does seem to be really a story for our times. Brian Cox is playing the Scottish economist Adam Smith, which sounds an interesting starting point anyway. But he haunts Fred the Shred Goodwin, who is the man who ran the Royal Bank of Scotland when it collapsed. And he's played by Sandy Grierson, an amazing actor. So that in itself is great. And I think what James Graham intends to do is to use the play as a study of late-stage capitalism contrasting with early-stage capitalism, which sounds as incredibly heavy. But as we know, James Graham is a man who's likely to make a big subject very, very easy to listen to, very funny, very lively. So I think that really is the big dramatic number of this festival.
Yes, I think I'm going to give a cheeky plug to your fantastic interview with James Graham, where he discusses the play in its nascent stages at that point. I'm sure it's come on quite a way since then. And it's opening in Dundee before it moves to Edinburgh,
it's got
I believe,
a short run in
great.
Dundee. Yeah.
And I'm sure after Edinburgh, anyone would be looking for a way for it to have a future life.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. For people like me who aren't able to get up north. Yes, very, very exciting, and also nice to have stars throwing their weight behind the festival like Brian Cox and James Graham. I know that's part of the international festival, but any spotlight on Edinburgh is a good one for the August season, at a time where fewer and fewer column inches are dedicated to those festivals.
And a shout out to you for National Theatre of Scotland, which I think has a reputation now for producing some absolutely amazing drama of all different types. I like the flexibility of the National Theatre of Scotland, rather like National Theatre of England, but I do think it's incredibly fleet of foot and has done some extraordinary things, including Black Watch, Gregory Burke's amazing play. And that's my top pick. And what's your top pick?
Well, no, I didn't realise we were so hierarchical. Are we going to do top pick singular, or are we going to do like a plateau of top picks?
We'll do multiple top picks. What's your first pick?
My first pick, okay, and this is not in at number one for anyone coming later in the list. I treat all my favourites equally. I thought I'd start with a little dalliance into the world of musical theatre, because we know the Edinburgh Fringe has been a fantastic stepping stone for brilliant new musicals. Look at Six as the obvious case, but also something like Cathy and Stella Solve a Murder, which came to the Edinburgh Fringe, then went on to the West End. So, big shows. I think even there was the Gwyneth Paltrow musical last year that ended up in the West End after it ran at the Upside Down Cow at the Edinburgh Fringe. So again, new musicals are always something to keep an eye on, and it's a lot cheaper to see a show at the Edinburgh Fringe than it is in the West End. So anyone looking for a frugal solution, catch these shows early. So my first one is Hot Mess, which is penned by Jack Godfrey, who worked on the hit musical 42 Balloons, with a book and direction by Ellie Coote, who also directed 42 Balloons. So it's the team behind that show, which was much loved when it was on at the Lowry in Salford last year. But this show is very different from that in that it's basically follows Earth and humanity as two characters having a turbulent relationship. And essentially, as you know, humanity isn't exactly doing great things to the Earth in terms of climate catastrophe. So it's against that backdrop that you're having a romance between the two figures. So quite a lofty context to which to write a musical, where you're trying to boil down the worlds of Earth and humanity into two characters. But they're played by Tobias Turley and Danielle Steers, who are big musical theatre stars. And most importantly, I think it's presented by the Birmingham Hippodrome in association with Vicky Graham Productions, and is one of the first big shows to come out of the Birmingham Hippodrome's new musical theatre department, which was founded a few years ago to support the next big musicals. And it's great that they're thinking nationwide about how they can use platforms like the Edinburgh Fringe to showcase new work and rising stars. And I think Jack Godfrey and Ellie Coop really are rising stars, because what they achieved with 42 Balloons was probably some of the best new musical work that I've heard in a while. So very excited to see how this two-hander plays out. And I'm sure, again, it will probably have some future life after Edinburgh. But all in all, I think that's a nice new musical one. We've also, not to plug myself, but we've done a roundup of new musicals to see at the Edinburgh Fringe for anyone who wants to go up and see what might be the next six. So check that out on WhatsOnStage.com.
I think you definitely should plug yourself. And I also think, I do think it's brilliant to see new musicals, and that they're actually always fun on the Fringe. I mean, that is one way in which the Fringe is a brilliant playground, because musicals, when you talk to Toby Marlowe and Lucy Moss about Six, the fact of playing in front of Fringe audiences was incredibly important in the development of that show. And I feel with this one, which clearly has serious intent behind it, that there's an intent to get this show as a nationwide venture, really, because it's come out of Birmingham, it's going to Scotland. I think that the fact of it being on the Fringe will be so important, because the audience reaction shapes it and alters how, I remember Toby saying that there was a song that people just responded to in a way they didn't expect once they put it up in the show. And that's always such a help. It's like an extended tryout, really. And I think that's one of the joys of Edinburgh. You see things in a nascent form that may slightly alter. It's probably a subject for another podcast, but I've recently been thinking how great it would be for all shows if they could have a bit of a tryout in front of audiences, because I think you can tighten and alter them and change how they land. And while audiences aren't always right, they are often right about the ways in which shows fall. And just that simple act of playing in front of an audience is very good as a tightening and strengthening exercise. I mean, it is why musicals, above all, that pre-Broadway tryout where shows are completely rewritten is always so vital in the development of the American musical.
It's funny bringing up America, because I think a lot of American producers in particular are now looking at the Edinburgh Fringe as a way of testing out material, because it's so much cheaper than putting it on in North America, and you've got that ready-made audience ready to give you feedback over, like you say, essentially what is a month-long workshop period. So, you might see the next Broadway hit at the Edinburgh Fringe before it even gets to North America. So I think producers like Kevin McCullum, who are responsible for some very big musicals this century, have taken a very keen interest in the Edinburgh Fringe over the last few years to try out shows and sort of present them in a more unrefined mode, but still hoping to get some life out of them. But anyway, yes, what is on your list? What's next up?
I'll stick with the musical theme, in fact, and say that I am looking forward to seeing Ohio the Bengsons, which is described as an ecstatic grief concert. It's a show coming from producer Francesca Moody, who has an incredible record on the Fringe and who definitely uses Edinburgh as a way of trialling shows that will have a longer life. It's already booked to come to the Young Vic in the autumn. And it has already been a cult hit in the US. It's been off Broadway. And essentially, it's an autobiographical musical two-hander and based around the real lives of the married indie folk duo, the Bengsons. And it covers multiple things. So it's about faith and Sean Bengson's rejection of his religious faith. It's about illness because he has a long-term hearing loss. And it's about music because he sings songs. And it's about hope, actually. I mean, it sounds extraordinary. It sounds idiosyncratic. And I really, really look forward to seeing it.
Well, I think it's a big year again for Francesca Moody, who, plugging a very old episode we had on the podcast last year, great for her, and also great for her to have spotted such a great show in North America and thinking this is going to work in the UK.
And she's got another venture, which is Edinburgh, which is a whole sort of venue, cabaret, everything coming up.
So that was actually going to be my next pick. So thank you for teeing me up perfectly. So back during COVID, Francesca Moody set up this Edinburgh Fringe, which was because the Fringe couldn't go ahead. There was a digital version of it presented where performers and artists would create work in their own sheds and then present it digitally to audiences remotely, which was quite fun, nice pun. But it has now evolved into a dedicated 100-seat venue that's located slap bang in the heart of Edinburgh. And over the course of the month, will, as you say, Sarah, be presenting a variety of cabaret-esque works featuring some really very exciting creatives. So you've got Tim Crouch doing My Arm, which I don't think has been seen in the UK for ages. And then Mamouna Mamon is bringing back Manic Street Creature, which also hasn't been seen for ages. And Marcelo dos Santos is bringing back Feeling Afraid, as if something is terrible is going to happen, which I know you love.
Oh, I love that so much.
And then Hayley McGee's bringing back Ages of Feeling, which was also a Fringe first winner and a sellout success in London. And Toby Marlowe and Lucy Moss are also doing a night of performances in August. So a great addition to the Fringe landscape, and hopefully one that will be retained for future years. And quite nice that it's something different. It says that sometimes you can try new things at the Edinburgh Fringe, and not everything, even with huge costs, is set in stone. So big win there for audiences, and big thank you to Francesca Moody for trying something new and giving us something new to talk about as well at the same time.
Yeah, I suspect it's somewhere I will end up hanging out, actually. There's quite a lot there that I would really like to see. And then going back, so I'll go for my next choice. I'm going to turn to something a bit more familiar at Summer Hall, which is Mark Thomas and Ed Edwards, actor and playwright, reuniting for Ordinary Decent Criminal. What's very interesting is that the two of them made a show a couple of years back called England and Son, which was about working class culture, fathers and sons, Brexit, racism, violence, male pressures, all of those things. It was a very, very good show, very good monologue. And it was fascinating to see Mark Thomas, who is a comedian who's had a long history of stand-up at Edinburgh, using all those discursive skills of stand-up to involve an audience in a dramatic work. And I'm particularly interested in this because it's about a rehabilitation experiment that happened after the prison riots at Strangeways. One of my weird side interests is prison reform. And
this is not where I expected this podcast to go.
No, I know. And
I'm here for it, though. I'm excited. Tell us why, Sarah.
I've read quite a lot in the past about prisons and how they function as societies, and rehabilitation in particular, and what you're trying to do in prisons, and blah-de-blah, Foucault, etc. Anyhow, this is a story about a recovering addict who is in prison, and he becomes part of this experiment. And so the combination of the subject matter and that duo makes me feel really excited about that as a show to go to.
It is that Edinburgh is very much one of the only times where the worlds of comedy and theatre do sort of cross over. I guess sometimes in the West End with spots of programming, but even like with Richard Gadd's shows, they kind of straddled those lines quite considerably through when he was presenting live work at the Fringe. I think it's quite fruitful. Or even someone like Hannah Gadsby with Nanette, that felt just as much theatre confessional as it did comedy. So it's a very fruitful space for that. And it stops us being too compartmentalised, doesn't it? And it shows that comedians sometimes are the best acting talent we have.
And it is that business about audience relationship, which is big in Edinburgh because you're often so close to the performer. And I think that is one of the great skills that Edinburgh hones, of being able to talk to an audience, being able to keep an audience. And Thomas, is incredibly skilled at that and has done amazing work. So I do think that will be very much high on my list. What's your next choice, Alex?
So this part of the podcast is called Unexpected People Writing Plays. I'm going to start with BAFTA winner David Johnson, who is one of my favourite actors of the last 5-6 years. Absolutely brilliant in Rye Lane. If you haven't seen Rye Lane, you should go and see Rye Lane. It is absolutely spellbinding film. He's the star of that, and he was also in Alien Romulus. So he's definitely on the up, and I think Hollywood is very excited about him. But he's bringing a play to Summerhall called Paldem, which, for fear of being demonetized and this podcast being presented in the adult-only section, I won't list what it's about, but there's a lot of sexual content involved and fetishisms, etc. So sounds like it's quite an unflinching reflection on contemporary relationships. I think the amateur porn scene plays a large role. So intrigued by that one. I know you're going to be reviewing that one, Sarah.
I'm intrigued by it. Also, brackets. In the main festival, there's a show, dance show called the Dandor Show, which comes with more warnings about sexual content than any show I've ever seen, which nearly put me off ever going to it, but which is absolutely brilliant. So I'll just give a small shout out to that, though you do have to be ready. It's quite explicit and you have to be ready for that. So yes, those two shows will make up my explicit Edinburgh Festival. But the other show also at Summerhall in terms of the unexpected people doing new things is a show called Sky, a thriller by Ellie Keel. Now, Ellie Keel produced one of my favourite shows of recent years, which was Bullring Techno Makeout Jams, which was a monologue about a night out, essentially. One of my, I absolutely adored it. Had a very long life, toured all over the country. I think it has only just finished touring. An exceptional show. And she has written a story about someone going to Skye, hence the title, and seeing three sisters, I think, seeing on a beach their father, which is very odd because he apparently died 4 years previously. Da da da. So all of that is, and I do love a thriller in a theatre. I mean, it has.
You can't beat it, can you?
Can't beat it. Sit there and hold me in the palm of your hand. So I'm very excited about that.
She really is almost the epitome of a modern multi-hyphenate, because not only is she producing amazing work, she also co-runs the Women's Prize for Playwriting, which is a fantastic new scheme that's helped. Actually, we'll be talking about that in a second. But she's also a novelist and has written a fantastic thriller novel called The Four, which, if you're looking for a summer read, if you're sat on a beach somewhere, I would wholeheartedly recommend. That came out last year. So yeah, Ellie Keel is definitely a fantastic one. I'm very excited to see how well Sky does. Sky's the limit.
Yes. Oh, good pun.
Oh dear.
And so picking up on your clever cue, so the Women's Prize winner Women's Prize for Playwriting winner in 2022 was a play called Consumed by Caris Kelly, which is coming to the Travers, and which, again, is a very intriguing setup. As set in Northern Ireland, family reunion. I love a family reunion on a stage. Events that happen after that. It does have... it is going to have an afterlife. So again, a really serious piece of work being seen for the first time.
Northern Irish family dramas are always a very fruitful topic for any play, as we've seen with shows like The Ferryman, for example, in recent memory. Obviously, it goes back way further than that, but especially at a time like this, when the turbulence of Brexit has kind of shaken some of those more settled strands of society in Northern Ireland. There's a lot to unpick at the moment, and I think that Caris Kelly has leapt into the heart of that with this new play.
Well, I think I've said here before that A Whisper in the Dark is one of my favourite plays, which is a dysfunctional family reunion in Northern Ireland. And this is a 90th birthday party of 4 generations of women returning. So I feel that there's a lot of scope there. Looking forward to it.
Sticking with the Traverse for my next pick, I feel like we're alighting on so many different topics at the moment, is Lost Lear, which was a huge success at the Dublin Theatre Festival in 2022. And it reimagines Shakespeare's King Lear, but through the topic of dementia care and the character of Cordelia, and presenting her as a carer. It sort of refashions King Lear and talks more about, a society where dementia and age has suddenly become such a more pressing topic because of the way that sort of like the population pyramid has shifted over the last 10-20 years. So very intrigued to see how that goes, but because it's had that huge success in Dublin, it's coming to Edinburgh very much as one of the shows to see, so I expect it will book out very quickly, if not by the time this podcast has already landed.
Yeah, and it links with in terms of reimagining of classic plays using puppets, because there are puppets in it, aren't there, you'd said. So it links with Faustus in Africa, which again is in the International Festival, which is Christopher Marlowe's Faustus reimagined. Play you don't see very often, tricky play. I've always found, I can't honestly say I've ever seen a production of Dr. Faustus that has absolutely worked for me, but I'm hoping this will be the one. It's done by Handspring Puppets, who are most famous for their puppets in Warhorse. But most interestingly, it's directed by the South African artist William Kentridge, who I find a completely compelling figure in South African culture. He's an artist, he's an animator, he's a theatre director, he's a storyteller, essentially, in all those forms. And I think he's a hugely, hugely significant figure. And I am really excited to see Faustus through his eyes.
I think that's what Edinburgh also gives you license to do, more so than maybe more commercial spaces like the West End, is take classic texts or stories and turn them on their heads and pull apart their insides and see what remains. And you see that, and that's one of the things I love the most, is when you see classics that are dismembered in such a way, because you see new sides of them and then you appreciate them in whole other ways. And that's what I hope will happen with my next pick, which is from Within Theatre, who had a breakout hit with their version of George Orwell's 1984, which ran at Summerhall last year and then moved to London. They are back, but this time in conversation with that show, they're doing Julia period 1984, focusing on the female supporting character, would you say, or protagonist? Would you say she's co-protagonist? I guess Winston is the protagonist and Julia.
I think she's, supporting. Yeah. I think it's good she's getting her moment in the spotlight. Yes. I think is what I'd say.
Because it's interesting that it comes now, because Sandra Newman wrote Julia, the novel, which is also focusing on the character and retelling 1984 as a novel. It's a fantastic book. I would definitely recommend that as a summer read. Maybe we should just branch out into WhatsOnPage.
Oh, very good.
Clearly that one's been going for a while in my brain. And here, I think it's a similar thing where they take the bare bones of what Orwell was writing and think, okay, we're changing the lens, we're changing the narrator. How does that change the story we want to tell? So that's also at Summerhall. Would really recommend that for anyone wanting to take something that they're familiar with but seen in a completely new light.
So I'm going to continue the summer reads theme, oddly, and say that I do love this idea of telling stories from different viewpoints. So what I am currently reading is a book by Jane Gardam, who died recently at a grand old age, was a novelist that my mother adored and that, in fact, I have discovered all my best friends seem to adore. And I haven't ever really read. And I've started with a book by her called Old Filth, which is filth being failed in London, try Hong Kong, which is an old sort of colonial acronym. And it's about a lawyer, and it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. I mean, it's described on the back as Dickensian, and it is Dickensian. But what's interesting about it is it's part of a trilogy that tells the same story from 3 different viewpoints. And I do love those switches of viewpoints, and especially with significant novels of earlier times, you very often need to have a reimagining of the woman's role. Not so much with Jane Gardam, who writes about women brilliantly. But I really think that is, I will look forward to Julia, because I feel she is, she's not underdeveloped in the book, but she is subsidiary, and probably of all writing today, she would not have been. So I think that's just an interesting shift in focus that's happened between the 20th and 21st centuries.
It's great in Sandra Newman's book. Oh, we really are delving into WhatsOnPage now. That in a way, Newman writes how she sort of like picks apart what Orwell has said about Julia from Winston's perspective to almost be like, oh, Winston probably thinks I'm blah, 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 but really I'm blah, blah, blah. And it's so funny because it's like this man from the 1940s had such a specific take on this female character, but that's so sort of like balled up in his own sort of like maybe more latent perception of a woman in general. And then in the 2020s, you could then look back and be like, oh gosh, there's real shades of misogyny there, aren't there? And it's funny, you see Winston now as this sort of feeble, emaciated, kind of deluded figure that she still loves in spite of everything. Whereas to him, he's like main character energy, I'm the guy that's going to save the world. Whereas, like, from Julia's perspective, he's just a bit more pitiful. And it's so good. I need to go and reread that book now.
Okay, now you've made me. I am actually going to tell you my holiday reading because we're on that subject. Then I'll do my last pick. So my holiday reading is Old Filth, All Fours by Miranda July, which, again, everybody I know has read and adored. And Edith Wharton. I've decided to read a little-known Edith Wharton, which is, I have, just tangent, I've been having quite a glamorous time. So I've just been to the Berkshires before I came to Venice, and I went to Edith Wharton's house, and I realised that you think you've read all Edith Wharton, but what you've essentially read is her early period novels, the ones that made her famous, like The Age of Innocence, and later period, some of which she really liked, like Summer. And the one I'm going to read is The Mother's Recompense, which she did towards the end of her life, and which just happened to be on my bookshelves as I was sitting off. So that's my holiday reading list. But I will now add Julia.
Yeah.
However, returning to
have we managed to turn an Edinburgh Fringe plugging podcast into we managed to sell a few copies for a novel instead.
Yeah, well, excellent. I'm all in favour of that. So I'm now going to go absolutely back to the theatre for my final choice, which is at the Traverse, somewhere I will be hanging out. And it's called She's Behind You, and it couldn't be more theatrical because it's pantomime. And it's written and performed by the veteran Scottish pantomime dame, Johnny McKnight, who has written an amazing 30 pantos and performed in 18. It looks at the whole business of what being a dame is and what the whole pantomime tradition represents from his point of view, having spent so long doing it. And the intriguing thing is that it is directed by John Tiffany, who obviously had huge success on the Edinburgh Fringe with Black Watch, which is where his career really takes off, has since become the internationally celebrated director of the Harry Potter plays, which transformed his career. So I think that will be really interesting. And it's, again, I feel it's the kind of thing that it's hard to get on a stage except at Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And I feel that, one of the qualities of the festival, what keeps people returning year after year, is that you see things that you might not see anywhere else and that are given their chance. And I feel that's one of them.
And I was going to say, one thing is also the unexpected joy of watching Panto in the middle of the summer, which does not happen very often.
I know. And as you know, Alex, I resist it in winter. So you're getting a bonus from me that I'm actually going to see a bit of Panto in the middle of the summer.
This is what they've been doing wrong the whole time with Sarah Crompton. They've been scheduling Panto at the wrong time of year.
Exactly.
So my final pick is a theatre company in bed with my brother who are returning to the Edinburgh Fringe for the first time since 2019, when they performed Tricky's second album, which was their second show, but made a lot of headlines because they attempted to burn money on stage, which was a sort of ode to the KLF, who burnt $1 million in protest. But this was all about how almost wasteful the Edinburgh Fringe is, because for so many people, you go up, you spend a huge amount of money, and then nothing comes of it. So it's kind of trying to dismantle the Edinburgh Fringe model by saying, what are we doing here? What's the point? All we're doing is burning money. So then they literally do try and burn money. But this time around, it seemingly is a bit of a departure from that sense of frustration. Although might still have it. All I've got to go on is their short blurb. But they are essentially playing the Shags, which is a much-loved band. And they take on the role of the Shags, and then we are the audience. So not much else beyond that. I feel as though it will be a show that surprises in ways that currently we cannot predict on this podcast a month out. but yeah, very intrigued and very excited. So fingers crossed.
But you will be sending me to have a look at when the festival's actually up and running. So watch this space. I'll come back on that one.
It does feel as though we are not losing maybe, but there's less of a space for those theatre companies that will go up every year and bring a show. And that would literally be the only thing they do, is just go to Edinburgh every year and build an audience that way. That model seems to have disappeared, but I think In Bed with My Brother have transcended that in a way that someone like Shit Theatre might have done, that they've now gained a cult status that they can come back and audiences will come with them. So hopefully there's still space for those.
And it's certainly true that, that is one way that the Edinburgh model has changed. In the comedy circuit, I think so many people now establish themselves online rather than go to Edinburgh. But that doesn't mean that there's not a kind of rich seam of great comedy that's going to be available. And the other thing we haven't mentioned at all, and just bringing this to a close really, is there is an enormous amount of international work, which is always fascinating, and international groups do still come. And Tunnel Group and many others are in the international festival. And then in the Fringe, I'm going to attempt pronunciation, my famously bad pronunciation of almost everything, the Entrerend Good, a Belgian company which has a really long record of bringing surprising shows to the Fringe. I'm always slightly scared of them because I'm a wuss. I think we've talked about this before. I'm a wuss as an audience member. I'm always terrified of being confronted, and they are quite confrontational, and they, the audience, are very much part of their shows. And this show is called Thanks for Being Here, which apparently is thanking the audience for their participation in the work. So I might give this a go. But I do think those smaller international companies at the Fringe are always interesting and worth a punt.
Yeah, fingers crossed we get even more of that, and we'll in 2 months' time we can look back and be like, wow, there were some fantastic things along the way.
Well, I'm sure we'll return to the subject
Yes,
of Edinburgh
obviously.
in subsequent
Always.
podcasts, but that's, I hope, given a rough idea of what we're going to be up to. And I can go off and sit in the sun somewhere, read
Sail
old
down
films.
some canals, and pick apart WhatsOnPage's top recommendations for summer reads. We really are the new Richard and Judy, Sarah. I think it's an inevitability that's where we're going to end up.
I should go away and brood on that.
Well, on that unexpected
Bombshell note.
On that bombshell note, thank you for listening to this week's episode of the WhatsOnStage podcast with me, Alex Wood.
And me, Sarah Crompton.
Make sure you like, follow, subscribe, leave a comment and rate us wherever you can. We'll be back every week with Friday episodes as well as a smattering of bonus midweek episodes when it takes our fancy. Have a fantastic weekend.